Bronze remembered. The runes on the walls of Runestone had outlasted kings and conquerors. The lines cut deep by hands that believed memory itself could be hammered into metal and made to endure. Yohn Royce laid his palm against one as dawn bled thinly over the Vale's peaks, the groove cool beneath his skin. The sea wind came up from below, salt on its breath, and the bronze shone where that wind had licked it clean. Stone crumbled, iron rusted, silver vanished, bronze endured. He used to think that meant hardness, stand firm, break teeth, refuse the bend. His wife had taught him it meant something else. She had come to him from House Coldwater, from a narrow valley where the burn ran cold even in summer, and winter took its tithe without malice or apology. Her father's lands were not rich, their hall was not grand, yet the Coldwaters kept their small folk alive, year after year, and that was a kind of wealth the High Lords rarely counted. She grew up knowing the names of shepherds and the smell of grain stored too long, knowing which families would run out of firewood first when snows came early. She brought all of that to Runestone, like a lantern carried into a cold hall. Yohn had married for alliance at first, as men did, and found, by some mercy he had never earned, that he had also found love. Not the love singers sold to boys, all moonlight and glory. This was quieter. It sat at the table and counted. It listened when he spoke and heard what he did not say. She was the only person who ever truly understood him, understood the man beneath the bronze and the bluntness, the man who felt the world like a weight and took pride in bearing it. She was an extension of him, and yet not. She filled what he lacked. She saw patterns where he saw only offences. When his anger rose, she soothed it, not by scolding, never that, but by placing a hand on his wrist and saying his name as if it were a door he could choose to walk through. She made him strong and flexible at once. Bronze does not shatter in the forge, she told him once, after he had come in furious from a quarrel with a bannerman. It softens first, then it is shaped. There were days when she seemed to see the world as it truly was, stripped of pride and pretense. She could look at a hall full of laughing lords and know who would betray whom by the end of the feast. She could hear a lie and tell which piece of it the liar believed. Sometimes she would leave him little gifts for no reason but that she had thought of him, small, needless kindnesses that mattered more than banners, a carved bit of driftwood shaped like a falcon with its wing chipped, a pouch of salt herbs for his joints, a ribbon the colour of the sea at dusk. Things made sense when she was in his life. After she was gone, Runestone was cold in a way winter could not explain. The sickness that took her was common as mud. A cough, a fever, a weakness the maester called harmless until it was not. No poison, no dagger, no enemy to strike back at. Just breath thinning, warmth leaking away. Life showing its sharp edge without malice. Yohn remembered sitting beside her bed with his great hands useless, bronze heavy at his throat, and she, smiling as if she were comforting him. In her last days she spoke plainly. "Do not let them forget," she whispered. "Not the people. They give us our comfort. The bread, the wool, the fires we never have to kindle. We are not wolves set above sheep, Yohn. We are shepherds. If the flock starves, the fault is the shepherd's." He had written her poems and letters when she lived, stupid with gratitude, the way a boy writes when he does not know how else to hold a feeling too large for his chest. He had waxed on her beauty at feasts until his sons rolled their eyes and his captains grinned into their cups. He did not care. Love made mockery look small. When she died, he did not marry again. How could he? How could he explain to another woman that he would always be less than he had been, that the person he had been with her was gone too, leaving him a stranger to himself? Bronze remembered. He had to remember for both of them now. The Vale called him away from Runestone's sea wind and runes, back to marble heights and pale politics, because the boy lord was dead and a mockingbird sat where a falcon ought to. The Eyrie rose above cloud like a promise no man could keep. Too high, too clean. Men forgot what fed them when they lived above the fields. At Runestone you smelled sheep and brine, heard the creak of carts and the mutter of small folk bargaining for salt. In the Eyrie, even grief sounded refined. Sweetrobin was gone, they said, from a snapped rail and a fall too quick for prayer. Yohn had inspected what remained and found his gut tightening at how wrong it felt. The nails too smooth, the wood too conveniently compromised, as if the accident had been rehearsed. The Vale had swallowed it because the Vale wanted to swallow it. Winter was coming. Who had time to pry at splinters when the world beyond the mountains was cracking? Petyr Baelish did. He called a council draped in sorrow and scented with coin. Petyr Baelish sat like a modest man, wearing power the way a cat wears another creature's fur, comfortably, shamelessly. He spoke softly of stability, of winter stores, of order in the wake of tragedy. He offered help in the manner of a banker offering rope to a drowning man, gentle voice, tight knot. Grain contracts routed through Gulltown, timber rights eased, debts extended, quietly forgiven, spoken of as necessities. Shared governance, he called it, as if power were a stew all could taste. Yohn watched men nod, not because they trusted Baelish, because they feared winter, and because Baelish offered a kind of comfort lords rarely admitted they needed. Certainty. A plan. A script. Across the hall, Lyn Corbray leaned with lazy grace, beautiful as a blade, his hand resting on Lady Forlorn's hilt as if the sword were a lover's waist. His smile was pretty as poison. He listened too closely, laughed a heartbeat too late, and his eyes flicked to Baelish whenever numbers were spoken, coin, grain, debts, as if tracking a tune he already knew. Yohn had never trusted pretty men with sharp swords. Pretty men learned early that faces could be armour too. The ravens came like hammer blows against the marble calm. The first brought King's Landing, the king wounded, the trial by 7 tearing the city into rumour and blood, law bleeding in the street, faith screaming one day and whispering the next. Men in the Vale muttered prayers to the 7 and pretended distance was protection. The second brought the south. The Golden Company had taken Storm's End. The old fortress fallen to sellswords and promises. If Storm's End could fall, what could not? The third brought the north. Stannis Baratheon victorious upon the ice, marching on Winterfell with Northmen and wildlings alike. The word wildlings made marble lords blanch, as if fear could be warded off by fur collars. Then came the letter. Stannis's seal. Stannis's hard hand in the words. A call for men and grain and oath. The one true king demanding support, not sweetly requesting it. Baelish read from it aloud, with a voice smooth as oiled wood. He spoke of hardship, of marching, of unity. He spoke as if Stannis was simply another claimant to be weighed like a sack of oats. He did not speak certain names. He did not linger on certain lines. Yohn felt something missing, in the way a shepherd feels a lamb go quiet in the night. And when the letter's talk turned northward, when the idea of Stark blood rose in the hall, he saw Alayne Stone, Baelish's daughter, quiet, modest, go very still. Not tears, not joy, control. Her fingers tightened on the chair's edge until her knuckles paled. Her gaze went distant for half a heartbeat, as if hearing wolves howling somewhere she could not admit she remembered. Yohn's mind, unbidden, went to Eddard Stark, the quiet man with weather in his eyes, honour worn like mail. Yohn had admired the Starks because they ruled like men who expected to be judged by their own people. The North remembered, they said. So did Bronze. Baelish folded the parchment away with care that looked almost tender. Corbray's eyes tracked that fold. Harrold Hardyng began to chafe. He had swaggered one day and woken the next to find himself heir not in waiting, but in danger. With Sweetrobin dead, every smile toward Harrold looked sharper. Every cup offered looked like a test. Men watched his mouth for weakness and his hands for greed. He drank less, listened more, asked questions Baelish did not care to answer. Yohn saw him in a gallery with Alayne Stone, their heads bent, her voice low. It was not flirtation, it was placement. Each word set down where it would land, then a pause to let it sink. Harrold's jaw tightened, as if tasting something bitter and true. The next day Harrold spoke louder in council. Not loud in volume, Harrold was no brawler, but loud in implication. He asked who had approved certain debt terms. He asked why certain watch rotations had changed since the boy lord's death. He asked what Baelish intended to do with Stannis's demands. Baelish answered with soft calm, and the hall relaxed, because the hall wanted to relax. But Yohn saw Corbray's smile tighten for the briefest moment. A pretty man's patience had limits. That night, rumour said, Harrold went to confront Baelish. He never reached him. They found him in a narrow service passage where torchlight barely reached the stones. One clean thrust beneath the ribs, angled up and in. No struggle, no scream. A soldier's kill, made for silence. Harrold lay as if someone had set him down carefully after breaking him, his face slack, with surprise more than pain. Yohn knelt and felt the cold creep up his bones. A man could die in battle and know why. This was different. This was dying in a corridor because someone had decided he was inconvenient. Near Harrold's hand lay a strip of leather, bronze dyed, cut clean, tied in a knot that made Yohn's throat tighten. Runestone tack. A suggestion, not proof. He knelt by Harrold, touched 2 fingers to the dead man's forehead with the tenderness of a priest, then stood and let sorrow soften into purpose. "We must have order," Baelish said. "Winter punishes disorder. I will not let the Vale tear itself apart, while enemies take castles in the south and kings bleed in the streets." His gaze found Yohn with a man's sad reluctance, as if he did not want to say what he must. "For your own safety, Lord Royce, until truth is known." A dagger dressed as mercy, and delivered so calmly that half the hall nodded, without realizing they were nodding at an arrest. Corbray's smile did not change. His eyes were bright, entertained, as if watching a play he had paid to see. Yohn felt heat behind his ribs, not rage, not only that, but grief. Grief that men could be made to swallow this so easily. Grief that his wife was not here to steady him, to take his anger and cool it into clarity. She would have seen the pattern whole, he thought bitterly. Instead, Runestone was cold, and he was alone. And bronze remembered, while men forgot. Hands settled on Yohn's arms, respectful, firm. No chains, no shouting. A soft escort, like men moving an old statue they feared might crack. As they led him from the hall, Yohn's eyes found Alayne Stone. For the first time he did not see a girl playing at bastardhood. He saw a woman counting. Her face was calm as new snow, but her eyes were storing everything. The groom's shaking hands, the too neat ledger, the quickness of Corbray's arrival, the way Baelish's voice had already shaped the room before anyone could breathe. Behind her, Baelish smiled, too early, too practiced, a victory displayed before it was safe. And in the corner of Yohn's sight, Corbray leaned close to Baelish as if to murmur counsel, a pretty man whispering into a merchant lord's ear. Baelish's smile did not change, but his eyes flicked once, quick, satisfied, like a man checking that a latch had caught. Yohn remembered his wife leaving him gifts because she had thought of him, and he thought suddenly of how men like Baelish left gifts too. A strip of leather, a frightened groom, a ledger line. Presence. Later, away from the hall's warmth, truth moved in the mountain dark. It did not come with trumpets. It came like a hairline crack running beneath paint. A servant whispered to a servant, and a servant's wife whispered to her lady, and a detail that should have been spoken aloud reached the ears it was meant to reach. Stannis's letter. There had been more in it than Baelish read. Not only hardship and marching and piety, not vague requests, commands, names, a deadline, and a proclamation demanded. The rider who carried the letter up the mountain had been stopped before he reached the Eyrie, not robbed, not killed, but shown a choice between coin and silence. The wax seal had cracked beneath moonlight. The truth read, memorized, then pressed back into place imperfectly. The man who did it did not trust marble halls. He trusted patterns. Brynden Tully had survived enough dead men's accidents to recognize one more. The unedited words were hard as iron. Rickon Stark lives, true-born son of Ned Stark, rightful heir of Winterfell, named Warden of the North in Stannis' name until he comes of age, and the Vale commanded to proclaim it openly. Then the quotas. House Royce named, House Waynwood named, House Redfort named, numbers and grain, and a full moon deadline set down like a judge's sentence. Baelish had read none of that aloud. He had folded obligation into vagueness. He had hidden the part that would make proud lords bristle and fearful houses panic. He had controlled the flow. That was the crack. And the crack reached Alayne Stone last, quietly, privately, the way a blade is placed in a hand rather than thrown across a room. She did not weep when she learned Rickon lived. She went very still, and something in her settled, as if a door that had been hanging open in her soul finally closed and latched. There were other whispers with the northern news. Another Arya, alive, escaped, the story muddied and bloody. But the word alive, sharp enough to cut through years of helplessness. A brother alive, a sister alive, perhaps not her sister, but a girl made to wear her name, a cruelty that demanded reckoning.
The North, not ashes. Hope, dangerous, bright, impossible to unsee. Yohn did not hear that from her lips. He heard it in the tightening of the world around Baelish, the way Lady Waynwood's posture changed when she learned she had been managed, the way the room's air grew colder when men realized they had been denied the chance to answer a king's command. Baelish's power was being the conduit. A conduit that edits truth becomes a choke point becomes a noose. Bronze remembered what was said, and what was not. When the door closed behind Yohn, sealing him in safety, he did not pray. He pressed his palm to the cold stone as he had pressed it to the runes at Runestone. He thought of his wife's voice, soft as wool against winter. Shepherds. He thought of Ned Stark's steady eyes and the way honor looked when it was not a costume. He thought of a living wolf boy in the north, named openly in ink, even if the Vale had not yet been allowed to hear it. And he thought of the girl called Alayne Stone, calm as snow, whose stillness had been the stillness of a blade deciding where to fall. Somewhere, above or below, Baelish was smiling. Somewhere, Corbray's pretty face was smooth as a polished sword, and his boots were clean enough for a man who claimed to have rushed. Somewhere, the blackfish waited in shadow with the true words in his mind, and the true letters crack in the wax. Bronze remembered. Wolves remembered. And men like Baelish only remembered what they thought they could afford to forget, until the cost came due. Yohn closed his eyes and tried, for one aching moment, to imagine his wife beside him, her hand on his wrist, her voice saying his name like a door he could choose to walk through. He opened his eyes again to cold stone and emptiness. But the emptiness did not feel like surrender. It felt like the hush before a hammer falls. Because somewhere in this pale, treacherous height, Someone else was remembering too. And this time, the memory had teeth.